October 27, 1942, dawn breaks over the South Pacific, about 420 miles northeast of Guadalcanal. Commander Edward P. Parker stands at the rail of the USS Northampton, staring as the shattered USS Hornet slips under the waves. She takes 140 American sailors with her, and with that, the Pacific loses its last operational fleet carrier. The oil fires from Hornet's broken tanks light up the sea for miles, turning the ocean into a burning mirror. The sight screams disaster. Parker jots a line in his log. 4 carriers in 10 months. At this rate, we'll have nothing left by Christmas. He knows those words could get him hauled up for defeatism, maybe even court-martialed, if his superiors ever saw them. But he just watched the 4th American fleet carrier go down in 1942. First, Lexington at Coral Sea, May 8th, then Yorktown at Midway. June 7th, Wasp torpedoed off Guadalcanal. September 15th, now Hornet at Santa Cruz. October 27th, each one lost. The Imperial Japanese Navy, so often dismissed as copycats, has torn apart more than half of America's Pacific carrier force, methodically one by one. Over in Japanese shipyards, workers are churning out new carriers, while America's losing them faster than anyone thought possible. Meanwhile, 3,700 miles away in Newport News, Virginia, Margaret Thompson, a welder, clocks in for the night shift. She has no idea that her work, and the work of thousands like her, is about to prove Parker's fears wrong. Nobody on that burning deck or in that shipyard knows it yet, but this moment, this low point, is about to flip into something no one believed possible. American industry is about to pull off a miracle, one that will change the course of the Pacific War and rewrite what naval power even means. It won't be clever tactics or new technology that turns things around. It's going to be welding torches, assembly lines, factories running day and night. America's democracy, finally all in, unleashes a productive fury the world's never seen. The collapse of carrier power in 1942 sparks a response so massive that Japanese officers will later say, fighting the Americans felt like fighting the stars. No matter how many you knocked down, more appeared. In just 3 years, American shipyards launch 14 Essex-class fleet carriers that actually see combat, more than Japan manages to build through the whole war. This isn't about genius admirals or secret weapons. The real transformation comes from everywhere. Housewives turn into welders, farm boys become ship fitters, and the whole country becomes what Admiral Yamamoto always feared, an arsenal with no limits. The disaster started back on May 8th, 1942, in the Coral Sea. USS Lexington, one of the 2 big pre-war American carriers, took 2 torpedoes and 3 bombs from Japanese planes. The crew's damage control was heroic. They saved her at first. But leaking gasoline vapors set off a chain of explosions. Lady Lex went down with 216 men. America lost its first fleet carrier. Captain Frederick Sherman, Lexington's commanding officer, would later tell Congress, "We went to war with 7 fleet carriers in the Pacific. The Japanese started with 10. Every admiral knew the numbers. We couldn't afford to trade ships evenly, let alone lose them faster than the enemy." The next blow came quick. June 7th, 1942, Yorktown, just barely patched up after Coral Sea, is torpedoed by Japanese submarine I-168 right after playing a key part at Midway. Midway ended up a huge win for Japanese carriers sunk, but America still lost one of its few precious carriers. September 15th brought another disaster. USS Wasp, working off Guadalcanal, took 3 torpedoes from Japanese sub I-19. She burned for hours. In the end, an American destroyer had to scuttle her. Out of 7 carriers in the Pacific at the start of the war, 3 were now gone. Then came the knockout punch. October 26-27, 1942, Battle of Santa Cruz, USS Hornet, veteran of the Doolittle raid and Midway, got hammered by coordinated Japanese air attacks. Crews tried everything, even tried towing her to safety, but with Japanese ships closing in, they had to abandon her. Japanese destroyers Makigumo and Akigumo finished her off in the early hours of October 27th. Back in Washington, Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, faced Congress with a grim update. Gentlemen, we have one operational fleet carrier in the Pacific Enterprise. She's up against 10 Japanese carriers. On paper, the war looked lost before it even started. But then something wild happened. The mobilization miracle kicked off. King had no idea what was coming. He didn't know about Margaret Thompson or the 1.7 million workers who would flood shipyards by 1944. He'd never heard of Henry Kaiser, the guy who took Liberty ship construction from 230 days to just over 4 days, or that American shipyards, which had only managed to launch one fleet carrier in 1941, were about to pull off the impossible. The real change didn't start with generals or admirals in some strategy room. It started in the accounting office at Newport News Shipbuilding. The day after Pearl Harbor, December 8, 1941, Yard Supervisor Clay Bedford called his foreman together. "Forget everything you know about shipbuilding," he told them. "We're going to build carriers like Ford builds cars." That revolution began because Helen Matthews, a former seamstress and brand new hire, watched experienced workers painstakingly rivet hull plates. She asked her boss, "Why not sew it together like fabric? One long seam instead of a million tiny dots?" Her supervisor laughed, then paused. "Welding instead of riveting? That would slash assembly time by 75%, plus welding needed different skills, easier skills. You could teach anyone to weld in days, not years, like a master riveter." Production exploded. By summer 1943, Essex-class carriers rolled out so fast it barely made sense. USS Essex herself was laid down in April of 1941. By December 1942, she was combat-ready, 20 months, start to finish. And that was just the start. At Brooklyn Navy Yard, a shipfitter named Giuseppe Diageo, yes, he was Joe DiMaggio's cousin, led a crew that streamlined aircraft elevator installation. They built whole elevator platforms on land, then hauled them into place with cranes. Saved 6 weeks per ship. Henry Kaiser's prefab techniques spread fast. Workers built deck houses and fixtures on the ground, even upside down, so welding was easier and stronger. What used to take 1,000 people a month now took 200 people a week. The numbers piled up fast. USS Yorktown, laid down December 1941, commissioned April 1943. USS Intrepid, same start date. Commissioned August 1943. USS Hornet, laid down August 1942, commissioned November 1943. USS Franklin, laid down December 1942, commissioned January 1944. Each ship launched quicker than the last. Philip Kellogg, a welder at Bethlehem Steel's Fall River Yard, kept a diary. January 1943, one carrier every 60 days. June, every 45 days. December, every 30 days. "The Japs must think we're using magic," he wrote. But the magic? It was people. By April 1943, women made up 40% of Kaiser's workforce. At Norfolk, Emma Rodriguez, a Mexican-American mom who'd never used a tool bigger than a sewing needle, became the yard's fastest riveter, 30 rivets a minute, each flawless. After Executive Order 8802 banned discrimination, black workers poured into shipyards. James Washington, a former sharecropper from Alabama, became a master pipe fitter in Philadelphia, installing fuel lines on 5 carriers, each one faster than the last. They weren't just building ships, they were racing against death. Every day, without a new carrier, meant more Americans dying in the Pacific. Photos from the fleet hung on every shipyard wall. USS Enterprise fights alone. She needs sisters. Build them now. Technology helped too. New York. Naval Yard engineers came up with modular construction, building entire sections with wiring, plumbing, everything, then snapping them together like giant blocks. Standardized parts made everything faster. Every carrier used the same pumps, panels, and fittings. Detroit built parts that fit ships in Newport News, Brooklyn, or Philly. No changes needed. This was the Essex Swarm. The Essex class didn't just change the game, they rewrote it. These ships weren't just filling gaps left by lost carriers. They were bigger, faster, and more advanced than anything anyone had ever put to sea. Each one weighed in at 100 tons, carried close to 100 aircraft, and could crank out 33 knots, faster than a lot of destroyers. The Japanese noticed right away. Commander Masatake Yokumiya, working as an air staff officer for the Japanese combined fleet, scribbled in his diary after seeing the intel, "The Americans are building carriers 8 days faster than we can train pilots. Every new carrier is better than anything we've got. We're not fighting the same Navy we hit at Pearl Harbor." By March 1944, American shipyards were doing the impossible. They were launching Essex-class carriers faster than all the other countries on Earth combined. This was the Kaiser miracle in action. While the big naval yards focused on fleet carriers, Henry Kaiser changed the game for the smaller escort carriers, the so-called jeep carriers that guarded invasion fleets and hunted subs. At his Vancouver shipyard, Kaiser used assembly line tricks borrowed from Liberty ships to crank out 50 escort carriers. Take the USS Casablanca, for example. From laying the keel to commissioning, it took less than 8 months. The Japanese, by contrast, took 2 years to finish Shino, and that was just a converted passenger liner. None of this happened in a vacuum. Behind every rivet and weld, there was a supply chain that stretched across the country. The steel for those massive flight decks, Pittsburgh, where the mills never slept. Aluminum for the planes came from Alcoa plants in Tennessee, eating up more electricity than some whole cities. In Akron, Ohio, Goodyear made the arresting gear cables, each one strong enough to stop a 12,000-pound fighter flying at 100 miles plant. Manager William Davis pushed his crew from making just 10 cables a month in 1942 to 200 a month by 1944. Ships alone wouldn't win the war. You needed crews, and fast. Captain Daniel Gallery came up with a fix: turn the Great Lakes into a giant training ground. They converted 2 paddle steamers, USS Wolverine and USS Sable, into training carriers, operating right out of Chicago's Navy Pier. By 1944, these ships were qualifying 500 new pilots every month. Back in Tokyo, the mood was grim. The Imperial Naval Staff kept reading the reports, and the numbers made their heads spin. Captain Toshikazu Omi, an operations officer, later confessed, "We knew America would build ships to replace what we'd sunk. We guessed maybe 6 or 7 fleet carriers by 1945. The real number was just impossible to grasp." Admiral Jizaburo Ozawa, who commanded the Japanese carrier force at the Battle of the Philippine Sea, faced 9 American fleet carriers and 8 light carriers with just 6 of his own. He didn't even call it a battle later. He called it an execution. By January 1945, American shipyards had found their rhythm. Brooklyn Navy Yard had 3 carriers on the go at once. Newport News had carriers in various stages on 6 different slipways. USS Lake Champlain set the record, commissioned June 3rd, 1945, after only 15 months of work. All that speed came with a price. More than 3,000 shipyard workers died in accidents during the war. Margaret O'Brien lost her husband when a crane cable snapped at Fall River Shipyard. She came back to work the next week, welding in his place. She told her crew, "Every ship we don't build means more gold stars in windows." September 2nd, 1945, when the Japanese surrender delegation boarded the USS Missouri, they sailed past a fleet that almost didn't look real. Over 100 carriers filled Tokyo Bay and the surrounding waters. More carriers than all other nations had managed in the entire history of naval aviation. Commander Tamichihara, one of Japan's top destroyer captains, wrote, "We'd sunk 4 of their carriers in 1942, and they'd replaced each one 3 times over. And then the numbers, the final roll call of Essex-class carriers that saw combat in World War II. USS Essex, CV-9, commissioned December 31st, 1942. USS Yorktown, CV-10, April 15th, 1943. USS Intrepid, CV-11, August 16th, 1943. USS Hornet, CV-12, November 29th, 1943. USS Franklin, CV-13, January 31st, 1944. USS Ticonderoga, CV-14, May 8th, 1944. USS Randolph, CV-15, October 9th, 1944. USS Lexington, CV-16, February 17th, 1943. USS Bunker Hill, CV-17, May 24th, 1943. USS Wasp, CV-18, November 24th, 1943. USS Hancock, CV-19, hit the water on April 15th, 1944. Then came USS Bennington, CV-20 in August. USS Bonhomme Richard, CV-31 in November. USS Shangri-La, CV-38 in September. The Navy kept churning them out. Boxer in April 45, Lake Champlain in June, Antietam in January. Some of these ships never saw combat, and more kept coming even after the war was over. And that's not counting the 9 Independence-class light carriers built on cruiser hulls or the 100-plus escort carriers America cranked out during the same years. The shipbuilding revolution changed everything. Wartime technology, modular construction, automated welding, assembly lines for entire ships became the norm. The folks who learned these trades, men and women alike, became the heart of American industry after 1945. Women who'd never picked up a welding torch before found out they could do anything in a factory. Black workers, once stuck with the worst jobs, proved they could handle precision work as well as anyone. By 1945, we were building carriers faster than we could find crews. Admiral William Halsey told Congress the truth in '46. "We went from too few carriers to more than we could use. No nation has ever built warships this fast." He wasn't exaggerating. Fast forward to 1985, 40 years after VJ Day, 5,000 shipbuilders gathered in Newport News for a reunion. Margaret Thompson, the welder from the beginning of this story, stood before the crowd at age 67. She said, "They call us the greatest generation now. We weren't great. We were angry. The Japanese sank our ships, killed our boys. We answered the only way we knew how. We built more ships than they could imagine. Every rivet we drove said, 'Remember Pearl Harbor.'" The carrier program didn't just win a war, it changed America. Richmond, California exploded from 23,000 people to 130,000 in 3 years. Shipyard workers took home more than $3 billion in wages, money that built the American middle class. Those shipyards broke old barriers, proving women belonged on the factory floor and black workers could do any job, given the chance. By August 1945, the U.S. Navy had 14 Essex-class fleet carriers that saw combat. 3 more Essex-class finished too late for the fight. Add 9 light carriers, 71 escort carriers, and the older carriers still sailing. That's a fleet. Japan had just 6 operational carriers left, most without trained pilots. Britain had 19 of all types. In 1962, Rear Admiral Hideo Yano from Japan visited the Norfolk yard where many of these ships were born. He looked around and said, "We knew you were building ships, but we never imagined this scale. How do you fight a country that can build in one yard What we built across our whole empire, we didn't lose to your navy. We lost to your factories, your workers, your determination to produce beyond all rational limits. Admiral Chester Nimitz summed it up best. The war was decided in 1943, not by any battle, but by the launching of new carriers. When we could lose a carrier and have two replacements already at sea, and Japan couldn't replace theirs, the outcome was mathematically certain. The legacy of that effort is still with us. The techniques invented for those war years, modular building, automated welding, the whole approach, a standard now. But maybe the real lesson is what free people can do when they pull together. In 3 years, America went from losing 4 carriers and facing possible defeat to fielding a carrier force no one could match. The real miracle wasn't just in the ships, but in the people who built them. Democracy's strength isn't just its armies. It's the power of citizens to outproduce and outlast tyranny. From 4 carriers lost to 14 Essex-class in combat. It's the greatest industrial comeback in history. Most of those workers are gone now, but their achievement stands. When the world was at its darkest and freedom was on the line, American workers answered with the greatest surge of production ever seen. The Lexington, Yorktown, Wasp, and Hornet weren't just replaced, they were outdone. Every new ship was better. Each one proved democracy could turn disaster into victory. Japan didn't lose because of some clever American strategy or secret tactics. They lost to Margaret Thompson with her welding torch, and to millions of Americans who showed what happens when free people pull together for a common cause. The numbers say it all. After losing 4 carriers, the US came back with 14 Essex-class carriers ready for battle. That kind of turnaround isn't just impressive, it's proof of what's possible when freedom's on the line. These weren't just ships rolling off the line. They were building victory, freedom, and the future right there in the shipyards. Their legacy still floats today, echoed in the words carved into the memorial at Newport News Shipbuilding. American workers fired back at tyranny with steel, answered fascism with freedom, and turned the threat of defeat into the greatest production miracle history's ever seen.